From the Gita today. Could you get that door for me? In general, if you're looking at a book which was written sequentially, where ideas are developed, where terms are introduced and then defined, and then they're turned into formulas, almost like you would do with math, but with ideas. Logic and philosophy, to a large extent, at least if they're rigorously done, it's like math, but it's just with ideas. So with a mathematical equation, you'll have numbers, and you have ways in which numbers relate to each other. But if you look at a logical syllogism, like the standard deductive logical syllogism, you have a major premise. That's a universal rule. That universal rule oftentimes is that all men are mortal. That's kind of a classic example. All men are mortal, or all people are mortal. And then you have a minor premise, which in a deductive syllogism is an instance of the general principle. So all men are mortal, and then Socrates is a man. So then you take all men are mortal, men mortal, or people mortal. Socrates is a person, and then you cross out the common term. So all people are mortal, Socrates is a person. You cross out, just like you do with fractions. You cross out those terms, and you're left with Socrates is mortal. And so deductive syllogisms are necessarily true or false. They're valid or invalid. And if all the premises are true, then the conclusion must follow from the premises. And it's just as elegant as a mathematical proof. There's other types of logic. There's other types of reasoning. Inductive reasoning is either strong or weak, as opposed to true or false. There's abductive reasoning, which is where you're missing that minor premise, that Socrates is a man. And so then you have to kind of like work from your major premise and reason towards the best possible conclusion by extrapolating. But to a large extent, rigorous logic, rigorous philosophy can be quite mathematical. So much so that if a philosopher is an analytic philosopher, what they'll do usually is they will write out their argument as a formula. And there's a language, analytic philosophy gave rise to a whole language. So you could write out philosophy as a proof, and then you can tell your audience, okay, here are my premises. Here's how I reach my conclusion. I gave you a real simple one. Sometimes there's many steps involved. And a good philosopher will even write out possible objections to their premises. I think the best objections to my premises would be this, and they'll spend some time with that as well. When you encounter a text which is systematically presented, and when I say systematically presented, I mean in the way I just described and gave an example of. In a way where key terms are introduced, those terms are defined, and then they're put into different formulas, and those formulas reach conclusions. And you're shown the math of the author. In general, when that's the case, it's a bad idea to just grab a book and flip the pages and look for inspiration. Because you're taking ideas which are contextually presented, which are systematically presented by the author, and you're destroying that context and that system by just flipping the pages and treating the book like a magic 8-ball or like a rolling of the dice. If you want to take such a chaotic approach to spirituality, where you like to play random games of chance and then assign to those random games of chance some sort of divine meaning. When you look at throwing tarot cards are actually less old than the 52 card deck that we play poker with. They were developed around the same time, but just a little bit younger than our deck, which is an amalgamation like a French deck, and I think there's a little German mixed in there. But that 52 card deck that we have with the 4 suits is actually older than the tarot by a few decades. So they're right around the same time. And tarot was just a game. There was no mystical meaning. That idea of ascribing mystical meaning to tarot, I believe, started in the early 1800s. So that idea is less old than the US of A. So obviously I'm not a gymongous tarot fan, nor am I particularly into astrology, nor am I into palmistry. I find you end up with one of two, nor am I into, reading bones, like throwing bones or reading tea leaves or all the other stuff. The I Ching is not my thing either. There's any number of these different modes of divination which are not my thing. Just full disclosure. And my reason for that is simple and twofold. Number one, you end up empowering someone to do a cold read on you. Instead of talking to people who know you backwards and forwards and know your entire life story and are wise, and their wiseness, their wisdom is surgical in that they have both wisdom as well as intimate knowledge of your life. Like sometimes I can admit, I've gone to my gurus before and asked them to tell me what to do. And inevitably they'll say stuff to me like, you have to give me all the details of what we're talking about, or I can't really give you advice. I can give you generic advice, but if you want me to really give you surgical advice, I have to know the whole situation. They'll refuse to give me advice unless they're provided with all the details, because I'm asking about something quite specific. So what happens when you go to see a palm reader, for example, is you're taking somebody who generally you have not vetted them very well. There's not a huge thing where you vet them. It's usually like your friend had a good reading, so then you go. But I mean, I get asked what's the sex of a child going to be by pregnant people all the time. And I'll just guess. And I think probably half the time I'm right and half the time I'm wrong. I haven't done, even on myself, I haven't done but I mean, yeah, I'm probably right half the time. And then when I'm right, people are like, oh, you're like, the people where I'm wrong, they just don't ask me next time. But when I'm right, I now become the baby whisperer. And if they ask me twice and I'm right both times, which I have a 25% chance of being right twice in a row, just statistically speaking, then I'm like a deity. And they'll tell their friends, and then their friends approach me and are either disappointed or impressed. But I really don't think that I'm magically peering into wombs and checking the equipment of a small child like some kind of human ultrasound, like Ultrasound Man or something like that. So, but usually the way it works is somebody tells you they had a great reading from a palm reader, which I think generally amounts to they flattered you. I usually think that's what it amounts to. And I'll just, to give some evidence for this, there was a guy who got people he got 40 people from, I think it was 14 different countries. And he gathered them all together, and he had them bring a sacred item to them, an item that was dear to them, a ring or a watch or something, a blanket, whatever. And he held that item. And then he wrote them out a reading, and he gave it to them. in a sealed envelope, and they read it. He did this 40 times with 40 different people. And his range of people's assessment of his accuracy was between 85 and 98%. Everybody gave him an 85. And some people gave him a 98. And his average was, somewhere in between those. People were losing it. They were crying. And they were so amazed. And they had so much faith in this person. So much faith. Then he gathered all these people together in a room, and he had them compare the readings he'd done for them. And it turns out he handed them all the same reading that he had prepared before he even met with the first person. It was a cold read. I get these texts on my phone. Want to write a book? We have people who can help. That was one of the things in this cold reading was, you've oftentimes thought about writing a book that others may benefit from hearing your life story. And people were they were so touched. Of course, when they found out that he had just cold read them and just made something up a priori before even meeting them, they were humiliated and had a whole lot less to say because they realized they'd been duped by a clever mentalist. Same guy also played 10 grandmasters at chess simultaneously at the same time. I think he won 3 games, lost 3 games, and then worked to a draw in 4 of them. And every single one of those 10 chess masters determined that he was at least at the grandmaster level, and some of them thought he was, beyond world class. Turns out he doesn't really play chess at all. But what he did was the opening move that these 5 guys did, he just remembered the opening 5 moves and then did those opening 5 moves on the other guy. And then when they responded back and did their counter, he then did that counter on these 5 guys, saw what they did, and just played the same game. So he played them against each other. Simultaneously, he's sharp. He was able to remember those moves for, a minute or 2. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Your short-term memory can usually hold at least 5 items. So that was it. And then they were also somewhat humiliated when that was revealed to them. So I think on one hand, when you put too much stock in astrology and palmistry, as well as everything else, you end up empowering somebody who you haven't really vetted, and you give them way more influence in your life than they should have. I'll double check my doctor, who has a medical degree and is usually a specialist. He's got, guaranteed he's got like a dozen years of training and maybe more. I'll Google what he tells me and get a dissenting opinion and then bring it to him and make him argue. I don't think people do that with all this divination stuff. So on one hand, I think you end up empowering people to cold read you, and you give them way too much influence in your life. And you'd be way better off talking to smart people, wise people, who know you quite well. And get over the flattery thing and look for actual advice. The other problem, as far as I can see it, is that when you're looking at throwing tarots or throwing bones or reading tea leaves or stuff like that, you're throwing an I Ching, you're really playing a random game of chance that's about equivalent to rolling dice. And your presupposition, your unstated premise, is that the best way God can communicate with you is through affecting random games of chance. That an omnipotent, omnibenevolent supreme being, the best methodology that supreme being's come out with for communicating with you, his devout follower in this world, is through influencing the laws of physics to affect what side a die rolls up. It's functionally equivalent to playing roulette or rolling dice or playing a slot machine. It's a random game of chance, and that's what you're doing. Shuffling the deck and pull a high card, whatever it might be. So that's my reason, my twofold reason. I'm not into cold reads. I'd rather talk to people who know me and who are wise. And number two, I think that God can do better than influencing a random game of chance. So when I'm going through a hard time, I never, ever open up a book and flip pages and go to one page and find a verse. I don't do it. I did do it, but then I hit puberty and grew up and my brain developed and I thought this stuff through and then I stopped. And I think the world would be a better place if everybody learned that lesson. It seems, mean that I'm saying this, but I don't mean to crush people's sacred cow situations, but it's a random game of chance. And more often, or it's a cold read, or some combination of the above. Sometimes it's a cold read and a random game of chance, and you have a terrible idea which has been multiplied by itself. So then it becomes an exponentially terrible idea. If you did want to do that kind of thing, then the best thing to do is find a system where that is the way the system was created, such as the tarot. Where you wouldn't want to do that is with a tradition where things were systematically presented. The Gita is such a text. Krishna introduces a word, and the first time Krishna will use a word, he will then, in the subsequent verse, he'll define that word. Then he'll mix that word together with other words he's introduced, and he'll formulate ideas. He'll present evidence for his ideas. For instance, Krishna makes a brilliant argument early on in the text. This is his first argument. He explains that the reason why you should believe in spirit, in something beyond the physical world around you, is because of consciousness. Consciousness is evidence that there's something going on beyond just the laws of matter, the fundamental forces and fundamental particles of matter. That's a brilliant argument. Consciousness as evidence for something beyond materialism is great evidence. It was great evidence thousands of years ago. It's great evidence today. Krishna doesn't just say, I'm telling you this. You should have faith in my words. Rather, he presents you with a piece of evidence to legitimate the argument he's making. If you're interested in that kind of logical theism, that kind of logical philosophy, then the Gita is your book. But what goes along with that interest is that you have to become a little systematic in your reading of the text. Otherwise, you'll miss a bunch of stuff that's in there. And so I think if you're into the chaotic approach, find a chaotic tradition. If you're into the systematic approach, find a systematic tradition, and don't apply chaos theory to something which is systematically presented, because you're basically saying you don't agree with the author. So just go find somebody else. Does that make sense? So the Gita is systematically presented. But there are some verses in the Gita which don't really require much context. They are beautiful. You just read them and you're like, wow, what a gorgeous verse. What a beautiful verse. What an elegant verse. It requires no context. I don't have to know where we are in the conversation. I don't have to know the question Arjuna asked. I don't have to see the preceding verses or the subsequent verses. These verses stand alone. I got one. Here we go. Patram, pushpam, phalam, doyam. Each of these words is singular. Patram, a leaf. Pushpam, a flower. Phalam, a fruit. Doyam, water. Yaha me bhaktya prayachati. one offers, prayachati, with bhakti, bhaktya, me, yaha, one offers me with bhakti one of these things. If one offers me with bhakti a leaf, a flower, a piece of fruit, or a glass or a drop of water, it's also in the singular, then tad aham bhaktya upahritam, that thing which was offered with bhakti. Upahritam means offered. Bhaktya, with bhakti. That item which was offered with bhakti. That. Aham, I will. Ashnami, I will eat it. Prayata atmana, because it was offered by a devout, self-controlled person. Prayata is from yam. We get the word yama and niyama from, or samyama. They all come from the same root. Prayata atmana, by a self-controlled person. A self-controlled self. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. That's Prabhupada's translation. It's a good translation. The only thing he misses is that the person who's offering that thing is a yogad person, a self-controlled person, a restrained person, a pure person. That's the only qualification required. And of course it's offered with bhakti, which is mentioned twice in the verse. Krishna repeats it twice. If you offer it with bhakti, that thing which was offered with bhakti, I will accept. And Krishna literally says, I'll eat it. I think this verse is beautiful. I went and stayed in New Vrindavan, it's one of the Hare Krishna communities, one of our farms. They had these log cabins that they built that you can stay in. In the log cabin, they have these, instead of paintings, they have these blocks of wood with verses from the Gita carved into them. And the cabin I stayed in, this was the verse that was carved into the piece of wood that was hung on the wall. And I thought, wow, what a winner, what a great verse. If people come up with the 10 best verses of the Gita, this verse will oftentimes make the list. Pacham pushpam palam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhaktyupahritam ashnami prayatatmanaha. Super famous verse. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf or flower, fruit or water, that thing which was offered with devotion, I will accept it. If it's offered by a yogad soul, a self-controlled person, a disciplined person. So, I think that this verse really is the cornerstone of all our ritual. And I think this verse is the cornerstone of all good theistic ritual. I think if you stray away from this verse, you get into bad ritual. I think this verse is global. I think this verse is true for all people at all times. I think it's solid. I think it's a great framework for any religion to govern and analyze their ritual. Now, the verse is based on a few things. The verse is based on the idea that God exists and that God is personal. That you have a personal relationship with the deity. I don't really want to get into making arguments for those points, but, that God exists, that's one, as the source of everything, You are a person, you're an individual, therefore God must be the source of your individuality. Therefore God must also possess individuality. So it's in the very idea that God's the source of everything. You can get the idea that God's an individual. If you want to argue that God's all good and all powerful, an all-powerful deity could have a relationship with everybody, an all-good deity would be willing to have a relationship with everybody, and therefore from an all-good and all-powerful deity, the source of everything, you get individuality, and you get the idea that everybody has a personal relationship. Remember how I said, like, with the premises, the logic flows? I just did that with theological ideas. If God's all good, therefore he'd want to have a relationship with everybody. If God's all powerful, he could, therefore an all good, all powerful deity would have the potential of a relationship with everybody. If God was the source of everything, that means he's the source of us. We're individuals, therefore God possesses individuality. And in this way, with premises, you can work forward from them systematically, and you can derive ideas which aren't just restatements of your premise. You can actually move forward and not just restate your premise in other terms, but you can actually do some business with those numbers by understanding how they're related to one another. But with ideas, theological ideas in this case. So those premises I don't really want to spend a ton of time on, but if you have those, I just got this light, and so I'm like, if you have those premises in place, then you can appreciate the verse. The very statement, I will eat it, indicates that God's an individual. The very statement, if you offer it, indicates you're an individual and that you have free will. And that there's a relationship between you and the deity, and the relationship is based on service and offering something. By specifying the term bhakti with devotion, it indicates that the thing God's really eating is your devotion. And I think that's a really important point. The other points are important, but they are, I would say, premises. This point, I think, is really at the heart of the verse. Those other points are presupposed in the verse. They've already been established through the Gita. But this point in the verse really shines forth. That the nature of our relationship with Krishna is that the thing we have that we can offer to Krishna is our bhakti, our love. Much like the word love in English, bhakti has a cognitive and a behavioral aspect. Coming from the word bhaj, which means to share, it indicates that you are giving something and sharing something and doing something. And the nature of the way bhakti is defined in our tradition, in our ancient literature, it has a devotional element. In fact, it says it's offered with bhakti. So the very usage of with bhakti indicates that bhakti is a cognitive feature. There's the offering feature, which is specified by the word upahritam, offered, and then also prayachati, which also comes from the root yam, but in this case it means offered. Also comes from the same root yam, which is where you get the word prayatatmana. Again, it was the same roots used in both words. Interestingly, if you look at the verse specifies that you're offering something. And bhakti, the way it's put into this verse, indicates that it's a devotional, cognitive feature, a mindset. It's not just what you do, but it's why you do it. Imagine somebody bought you a really nice birthday present. And you said, oh my God, this is so sweet. You got me a birthday present. You said, why did you do that? And they go, because I want you to buy me a present on my birthday. What would happen to your that warm feeling you had when you got the gift? What would happen to it? Alternatively, they were to say to you, just because I love you and I care about you, and I thought you might enjoy this. That feeling would augment and it would expand. On the other side, it would evaporate. Why? Because it's not just what you do, it's why you do it. And so the very usage of the word bhaktya in the instrumental with devotion indicates that the offering is made with a cognitive feature, with a mindset. And that's what makes Krishna accept it. He specifies that twice. It's unusual. Bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhakti upahritam. It's used twice, within just a couple words of each other, stressing how important it is. You know, the reason in Sanskrit literature why you repeat a word twice is because you want to emphasize it. How critical it is, how important it is. What do you get for the person who has everything? Yeah, because no one has everything. Because they don't just have your love, you have to give it. Even God isn't really omnipotent. If you have free will, God's not really omnipotent with a capital O. A fully omnipotent deity would necessitate a predetermined world where everything that happened in the world was God's fault, good or bad, because you had no free will. Because he's fully omnipotent, nothing is above him, nothing can act against his will, and therefore everything happens automatically. If you have free will and you're allowed to make free choices, the very existence of your free will means that God is not truly fully omnipotent, which means he doesn't have everything. And so what do you get for the person who has everything? You give them your love, because nobody has everything. That's also a very reasonable point. You can arrive at that point. It's not just an idea. It's a good argument that makes sense, that's based on premises. And if those premises are true, the conclusion is true. If you have full omnipotence, right, then nothing can act against you. I have free will, therefore, no one has full omnipotence. Even if you have a small amount of free will, it still counts as not having omnipotence. Even if genetics takes away some of what we think is free will, still, a little bit of free will still counts. So the very way the word bhakti is used here in the instrumental case, modifying the idea of offering, qualifying the idea of offering, indicates it's a cognitive feature. And the etymological root of bhakti indicates it's also behavioral. And so bhakti is an interesting word in that it has both cognitive and behavioral features embedded within it in the way it's used. It's very similar to the word love, which can be used as an adjective, can be used to communicate feeling. It can also be used to communicate action. The word love can be used as a verb. Loving, loved, will love. It's all being used as a verb. And so you can see love as a noun, as a feeling. You can see love as a verb. And in fact, in the English language, that multivalent word gets used in both ways regularly by all of us. In that sense, it's a good synonym. It's a good way to understand something of how the word bhakti is used in our sacred literature. So Krishna is specifying that he doesn't really eat the item you're offering him. Rather, he eats the devotion with which that item is offered. I think that's an incredibly important point that should govern all ritual in all traditions. When Prabhupada was ritually installing the first Radha Krishna deities ever in the Hare Krishna movement, do you know where the first Radha Krishna deities were installed? Los Angeles. 1970, LA. So Prabhupada was bathing the deities, he was installing them, and he told the story of Sanatana Goswami. During the lecture in 1970, and whatever that is, 52 years ago, in Los Angeles, just up the road. I think they were still at Pico Boulevard at the time. think they weren't at La Cienega, they were at Pico Boulevard, and then they moved to where they are now. But they might have already gotten the Huatzca Temple, I can't remember, but they were somewhere in between Pico and the Huatzca Temple, where the temple is currently located. And Prabhupada was doing the installation ceremony. They didn't have proper things, so he was using a ladle. He was bathing the deities with a ladle, a metal ladle, because they didn't have, shank, they didn't have conch shells to bathe, and all the stuff that we now have. It was prior to all that stuff being in every temple. And there's pictures. There might even be some video of Prabhupada doing the installation ceremony. But anyway, Prabhupada was talking to the devotees, and he told them a story from our tradition 500 years ago, of Sanatana Goswami, one of our framers, one of our early theologians. And he found the deity of Krishna. He was a monk. He was a wandering mendicant monk, lived under trees. He got a deity of Krishna, and so he used to put the deity of Krishna in the tree. And then he would sleep under the tree, on the ground, and the deity would live in the tree. Kept away from the rodents and what have you that were on the ground. He sat in a tree, and he would cook for the deity every day. And what did he make? He made bread balls. I don't think they were chapatis. Like dough balls made, cooked over an open fire. And he didn't have salt, so he had some flour, he had some atta, and he got some water. Most probably it was Yamuna water. And he would just make a dough, kind of flatten it out a little bit. I don't think he had a rolling pin. He wasn't making like proper chapatis. And he would just cook those on an open flame. Either a cow dung fire or a wood fire, whatever the case may be. And he was offering those, unleavened, homemade, bread type items. No salt. There's a whole story how he got salt. He really wanted to offer his deity bread balls with salt because he felt like it wasn't very nice for the deity. So that was a whole leela how he got the salt to worship the deity. The merchant who gave him the salt also ended up building him a temple. It's quite mystical. It happened. The temple still stands. Even Aurangzeb was just close by. Still didn't manage to destroy the temple completely. Something you might not know, but the Muslim invasion, the Sultanate was located in Delhi, and Agra was another massive Islamic stronghold, and Vrindavan is between Delhi and Agra, and so it's not like a great place to be during the Muslim occupation of India during the Mughal period. And at some point, initially Akbar seemed a little more favorable. At some point, Aurangzeb got really nasty in the Mughal rule, and he began destroying all the deities in Vrindavan. And so the deities in Vrindavan, they all moved to a place called Jaipur, which is southeast of Vrindavan. Some, 150 kilometers, be my best guess, maybe 200 kilometers. Southeast of Vrindavan, you'll find Jaipur. And Jaipur was the home of the Rajasthani kings. It's right by the Thar Desert. It's not a very hospitable place. Extremely dry, extremely arid, extremely hot. Not super valuable real estate. But there were these Hindu kings there, the Rajputs. And they never got fully conquered by the Muslims. They also fought with the Jat kings. They fought with other Hindu kings as well, but they never got fully conquered by the Muslims. And all the deities of Vrindavan, many of them anyway, they went to Jaipur. And the kings of Jaipur, right around the founding of the city in the early 1700s, they became devotees of Govindaji, Rupa Goswami's deity. Jiva Goswami's Radha Damodar there, Radha Gopinath are also three of the primary deities of Vrindavan. Three of the main deities of Vrindavan live in Jaipur. Sanatana Goswami's deity actually lives in Karoli, which is kind of halfway between Vrindavan and Jaipur. It's on the same road, just a little bit off the path. And you can sponsor, they have a Chapan Bhog where they offer 56 offerings to the deity every day, and you can sponsor it, and then they serve lunch to your party. easily enough food for 40, 50 people. You show up there with like a huge group of people and they just feed everybody every day. It's how they run the temple. They make this incredible offering and devotees sponsor the offering and then come and eat with them, and they eat the prasad that's been offered to the deity. So those deities were moved there, and they live there even now. And if you look at like the Jaipur kings and their records and the court records, we are devotees of Govindaji. This deity came from Rupa Goswami. We are sworn to this deity. We are members of the Gaudiya tradition. And now, Jaipur, which is the 10th largest city in India, 4 million people, the main deity of Jaipur is Govindaji. That's their main temple. That's the temple of the kings. And I'm just getting ready to go there in about a week, so I'm excited about it. I haven't been there, and it's been 30 years since I've been to Jaipur, so I'm really excited to go back. And 30 years ago I went to Mangalarti, 4:30 a.m. at the Govindaji temple, and there's like 1,000 pilgrims there. And these aren't people from outside. Like in Vrindavan, it bulks up on the weekends and stuff, where all the Delhiwalas come to Vrindavan to have a little bit of a pious religious vacation. They'll also go to Rishikesh sometimes when it gets hot, but in the wintertime they go to Vrindavan a lot. And so the population of Vrindavan will swell, fivefold on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Is all these rich people from Delhi come to relax and enjoy in a pious way. Jaipur is not quite like that. So those 1,000 people who are there for Mangalarti, those are just the locals. They just come to Mangalarti and they sing these beautiful songs, and the women are like full of devotion, throwing themselves at the deity. It's really beautiful deities, gorgeous deities. Anyway, so Sanatana Goswami was worshiping his deity in a tree during the height of the Mughal Empire, living under a tree. And Prabhupada told this story. And he told the story how Sanatana Goswami said, hey, this is all I've got to offer you. I don't have any salt. All I've got is a little bit of flour and water. I love you. I'm offering you the best I possibly have, and therefore you need to accept it. It's a simple story, almost like a parable, just a very, very simple story about a devotee who was penniless, who offered the simplest of offerings to Krishna, and Krishna accepted it because it was offered with love. And it's an apropos story to tell at the installation of Radha Krishna deities. Of course, not really, because Prabhupada had a bunch of followers at that point and a temple, and the followers had a bunch of money and manpower, and so we were getting set up to offer former ritual, 6 times a day, starting from the morning all the way until the evening. Our ritual day begins around 4 a.m. and it finishes around 9 p.m., 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Someone's in there doing stuff from 4 a.m. until 9 p.m. So you guys, like a 7-hour break? But for 17 hours a day, there's stuff going on. It probably goes on even a little longer in LA. It's probably more like 10 p.m. and maybe 3:30 a.m. They start a little earlier, they end a little later. And then Prabhupada started crying. And he said the real thing is bhakti. And he started preaching to his disciples. He said, what do you really own? What's the value of your possessions? What do you really own in this world? It's nothing. Just Krishna, please, I'm very low, but I brought this thing to you with love. Please accept it. And Prabhupada explained what he thought was the essence of bhakti to his disciples when we were installing to worship ritually in a very, very labor-intensive and costly way. I mean, we spend $1,000 a month on flowers. That's why we have a farm. because for 7, 8, 9 months a year, they supply the flowers for us. But as soon as the flowers run out, a couple of months in the wintertime, flowers run out, it's $1,000 on flowers a month. And that's just to keep things going minimally. We want to do a couple festivals, now it's $2,000. We spend a lot of money cooking for and serving and taking care of the deity. We value this. It's part of our tradition. And Prabhupada was establishing that culture of ritual, our ritual culture, centered around deity worship for the Hare Krishna movement in 1970, before I was born, a couple of years before I was born. When did you come here? What year did you come here?
Me?
Yeah.
Here?
U.S.
U.S. in about 60 years.
60 years. What year? What year did you come to the U.S.?
Oh, that was 19, when I graduated.
Pushpanjali, what year was it?
64, 65.
64, 65. He's more an American than I am. He's got like 8, 10 years on me. So this is after he came, but before I even was born. So Prabhupada was establishing deities, and he was, the amount of time we spend worshiping deities is ridiculous. We put so much effort into maintaining deity worship. Most Hindu temples, they don't do this. We're spending dozens of hours a day worshiping the deities. Dozens of hours a day. Even in a small temple like ours. Up in LA, it's probably more like 50, 60 hours a day of labor. It's incredible the amount of work that deity worship takes. Serious deity worship. And it's 365. Never ends. Never ends. When I got here, they used to close the temple on Rath Yatra and all go up to LA. And I was like, we can't do that. So I just didn't go to Rath Yatra, stay back and worship the deity. Because we have to do it we do it forever. 365 days a year, forever. Pass it on to our children, to our students. They pass it on to their children's students. And the worship goes on generation by generation for all time. We leave notes for the next generation. So when we die, the things we've established are written down so they know what to do. All the temples in India have books like that, where they lay out their padhatis, their method of worship for the next generation. It goes on like that for dozens, scores of generations. It's very common in India for a Brahmin to be able to name 50 generations of his forefathers by name from memory. But what he's also learned is he's learned the rituals they established and the worship they did so he can maintain it, because it's successfully maintained each generation by the next generation. So Prabhupada was setting us up for that in a serious way. And the story he told on that day was about Sanatana Goswami worshiping a deity in a tree with bread balls, with no salt, but with devotion, and how Krishna accepted them. And then he chastised us. And he said, what's the value of your things? What do you really own? You don't even own your own body. It gets repossessed through old age, disease, and death. You think you own land, but then you're dead. You're buried on the land's still there. What do you really own? Prabhupada was talking to someone one time. He was saying everything belongs to Krishna. And the person was saying, Prabhupada, how does Krishna have so many wives? Prabhupada said, everyone is Krishna's wife. He goes, you think you have one wife, therefore you're a thief. You're an adulterer. Everybody belongs to Krishna. And he was chastising one guy who owned a glass factory. Prabhupada said, where do you get the glass? He goes, no, I make it from sand. Prabhupada said, where do you get sand? He goes, Then he realized it was a natural resource that he just dug up and took. Prabhupada said, yes, you're a thief also. What do we really own? So this whole idea of giving something to Krishna, it's predicated on the idea that you own something. But if you don't own anything, what can you give to Krishna? Well, the one thing I own is my love. So I take whatever simple thing I have and I offer that to Krishna. But I never forget that these things don't really belong to me. And that the real thing I'm offering Krishna is my devotion. And Prabhupada was trying to establish it. And he actually got so worked up, he began crying while he was teaching his disciples about deity worship. And he himself modeled the behavior by speaking to the deity in front of everybody. Simply, my dear Krishna, I'm very fallen and lowly, but I brought this little thing for you. Please accept it. And he modeled what the mood of a devotee when they pray, when they offer things to Krishna, what that mood should be. I think Prabhupada in that lecture in 1970, 52 years ago, to his fledgling devotees and his fledgling society, when installing the first set of Radha Krishna deities for formal worship, I think he nailed the essence of devotion. And we find that it's totally consistent with what Krishna teaches here. The essence of ritual is you're moving in the world, there's stuff in this world, you're playing with the stuff in this world, you're enjoying the stuff in this world, you're eating and consuming in a variety of ways stuff in this world. But none of it really belongs to you. And so you establish some ritual to remind you of the reality that nothing in this world truly belongs to you, that everything belongs to Krishna, and that the best use you can make of your short life and your little bit of free will is to willfully and voluntarily offer that back. And that's beautiful, and that's gracious, and that's amazing, and that's powerful, and that's stunning. And that's a life worth living. A leaf, a flower, fruit, or water. It's all super vegan, super minimalist, sustainable resources, things that can be regenerated. Human beings cannot live where there's not water. So offering water is the easiest thing ever, because if there's no water around, you're dead. And so that's why great civilizations all flourish on the banks of rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates, the Jordan, the Nile, the Amazon, the Ganga, the Saraswati, the Yamuna. It's all rivers. Because we need water to survive. And so anywhere you are that you're living, there's water. If there is no water, you've died. And so you don't have to worry about doing any ritual because you've passed away. And then leaves and flowers and fruits, they're all just part of any simple agrarian society. Anywhere you go, we need these things. I also can't live without these things. The simplest of offerings, they're all regeneratable, they're low impact, no damage to the environment, part of the cycle of life. You take some simple thing and you offer it with love, the best you have, and that's a complete offering, and Krishna accepts it. And if your heart is pure, if you've understood these points, and you make that simple offering, that is a complete offering. And if you don't have that devotion, then you can offer Krishna gold and silver and rubies and gems, and he won't accept them. He already owns them, so why will he look at your fake offering of them? It's like a thief offering you back something that already belongs to you. You're just angry that he's like, for what he's still keeping. I stole $1 million from you, but I'm giving you back 100,000. Please accept it. Practically, you want to punish somebody for doing such a thing. In contrast, a small child, they have to borrow money from you to buy you a gift, but they're really sincere in their desire to reciprocate with you, and you're the happiest with such a handmade, such a simple offering, even if it's coming from your own funds, even if it's coming from your own assets. I think this verse nails it. I think it's the core of ritual. I think any ritual which strays away from this gets too ritualistic. It gets too based on material things and ideas of ownership and ego. And if you keep this idea at the forefront of your consciousness, your ritual will always be vital. It'll always be powerful. It'll always connect you to something higher than yourself. It's the essence of what good ritual is meant to be. And just as a slight nod to the systematic nature of the Gita, the very next verse is Yat Karoshi Yat Ashnasi Yat Juhosi Dadasi Yat Tapasyasi Kaunteya Tat Karushva Madarpanam. Yat Karoshi, what you do. It's in the second person. Krishna's talking to you. Yat Juhosi, Yat Karoshi, what you do. Yat Karoshi, Yat Ashnasi, what you eat. Yat Juhosi, what you offer. Dadasi, what you ritually offer, dadasi, what charity you give. Ritual offering, charity. Yat tapasyasi, what austerities you perform. It's kind of like the entirety of someone's life. Various austerities, various consumption, various charity, various ritual offering, various action. Tat kurushva, that you do. Madarpana, as an offering to me. And so you see what starts out very simply, a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, leads to eventually your whole life becomes an offering. And then we say Atma Arpana, you offered yourself. Atma Nivedan, you submitted yourself. These are the symptoms of our path of bhakti, also known as Sharanagati. You offer yourself. You become the offering. Your life becomes the offering. Actually, the Veda includes a human sacrifice. It's called the Purusha Meda Yagna. It's in the Upanishads. It doesn't mean you actually offer a human being. It means you offer your very life. Your life, your being, your words, your thoughts, your deeds, your everything is offered to Krishna. And how do you do that? Such an impossible goal. You start off with something really simple. You make some simple offering of food, and that's how you start the process. And so you see that the verse stands on its own beautifully, but in context sequentially you see the ideas evolving. And you see this kind of systematic, well thought out, reasonable, and still intensely devotional theism in the Gita. It's not chaotic. It's not random. It's not a roll of the dice. It's surgical. It's based on sound premises. It develops those ideas, becomes a philosophy, becomes a lifestyle, and has the ability to engage with you on every level. Thank you very much, IGTV. Let's do a little kirtan. Hare Krishna.